Welcome to tonight's story. What you are about to hear is not a work of fiction, but a tale built on the memories and testimonies of real people. For generations, the villagers of a small corner of Essex, England, have whispered of strange lights, ghostly figures, and footsteps echoing through the night. At the heart of these whispers stood a building once called the most haunted house in England, Borley Rectory. This was not simply a crumbling house on a quiet lane. To the locals, it was a place where history and tragedy collided, where the past bled into the present. Parents warned their children never to go near its gates. Travelers spoke of their horses refusing to pass the road that led to it. And priests who entered its halls often left with a deep unease they could not explain. The stories grew darker with each generation. A nun, bricked alive within its walls for a forbidden love. Families tormented by unseen hands. Messages scrawled on the walls, pleading for release. Investigators from across the world drawn to its mysteries. Even Ed and Lorraine Warren, among the most famous paranormal researchers in history, would one day step into its shadow. In the quiet countryside of Essex, England, lies a story that has haunted generations. This is the tale of Borley Rectory, once called the most haunted house in England. To understand its curse, we must go back to its very beginning, when the first bricks were laid and the first shadows began to gather. The year was 1862. A new rectory was being built for the Reverend Henry Bull and his family. It stood in the small village of Borley, surrounded by farmland and ancient churchyards. On the surface, the construction of this home was an act of faith and service, a place where the Reverend could live, pray, and guide his congregation. The building was large, almost imposing for such a quiet village, with long corridors, countless rooms, and gardens that stretched into the misty fields. To many, it was a symbol of stability. But to others, it felt strangely out of place, an architectural shadow looming over the land. This new rectory was not the first. An earlier rectory had once stood on the same site, serving the same purpose. But in 1841, that original house was destroyed in a terrible fire. The flames raged through the structure, reducing it to ashes. Villagers would later whisper that the fire had not been an accident, that perhaps something darker had been at work. For over 2 decades, the site lay abandoned. Local children avoided it, saying the ground felt cold even in the height of summer, as if the earth itself carried a memory of suffering. When Reverend Bull began construction on the new rectory, many wondered if disturbing the land again would awaken forces best left alone. The villagers already knew of stories connected to the land, stories that stretched back far beyond the 19th century. According to local law, centuries earlier, a young monk had been stationed at the Borley monastery. In secret, he began a forbidden relationship with a nun from a nearby convent. What started as stolen glances in candlelit halls soon grew into a full affair, hidden from the eyes of their brothers and sisters of faith. They dreamed of running away together, leaving behind the rigid rules of the church to live as man and wife. But love, in this case, would not be their salvation. It would be their damnation. When their secret was discovered, punishment was swift and merciless. The monk was said to have been hanged for his betrayal of holy vows. But the fate of the nun was far more terrible. The story goes that she was taken to the grounds where Borley Rectory would later stand. There, the elders of the monastery carried out a sentence so cruel it continues to shock those who hear it. The nun was bricked up alive within a wall, entombed in darkness, left to die slowly, her prayers unanswered, her cries echoing into silence. The villagers believed that her restless soul never left. They said that on quiet nights, you could hear faint knocking sounds within the walls of the rectory, as if she were still trying to claw her way out. Others spoke of seeing a pale figure in a nun's habit, gliding silently across the grounds, her face hidden in shadow. Children dared each other to approach the ruins of the old rectory, only to run away screaming when they felt unseen eyes watching them from the empty windows. By the time Reverend Bull and his family moved into the newly built house in 1862, the legend was already deeply rooted in the village's imagination. Locals whispered that the rector had chosen to build upon cursed ground, and that the spirit of the nun would not rest simply because new walls had risen from the ashes. They told stories of a woman in white appearing at dusk, her presence so strong that even horses pulling carriages would panic and refuse to approach the rectory's gates. Fear became part of daily life. Borley Rectory was not simply a building, it was a presence, looming both physically and spiritually over the people of the village. Rumors grew with each passing year. Some claimed that the nun could be seen wandering the garden paths on moonlit nights, her form so real that those who encountered her thought they were speaking to a living person until she vanished into thin air. Others said the silence of the rectory was never complete, that soft whispers could always be heard, especially in the long corridors, as if the walls themselves remembered the tragedy that birthed the haunting. By the late 19th century, Borley had earned a reputation that extended far beyond the village. Travelers passing through would stop to ask about the infamous nun's ghost, and locals were eager to share their stories. It became a mixture of folklore and lived experience, a legend that blurred the line between superstition and reality. The rectory, meant to be a place of faith and comfort, had instead become a place of dread. And this was only the beginning. The tragedies and terrors whispered by the villagers in the 1860s were but the first notes of a haunting that would grow louder with every passing decade. For in Borley Rectory, the past was never truly buried. And the nun's sorrow, carved into brick and bone, was only waiting for new witnesses to keep her story alive. As the years passed after the rectory's completion, stories of strange happenings began to grow louder. It was no longer just the old legend of a bricked-up nun whispered by the elderly. Now, living witnesses, children, villagers, and even clergymen, claimed to experience the haunting themselves. One of the earliest and most chilling accounts came from a group of children who dared to enter the east wing of the rectory one afternoon. The day had been bright, but as they stepped into the drawing room, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, the room unnaturally cold. They heard nothing but their own breaths as their eyes adjusted to the dim light. At the far end of the room, near a wardrobe, a shadow moved. Slowly, it took the form of a woman in a nun's habit. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her body hovering slightly above the floor. The children stood frozen, unable to scream. Then, with one smooth motion, the figure turned to them and began gliding forward. That was when the silence broke. Their screams echoed through the rectory as they bolted from the room, racing down the halls until they reached the safety of the garden. The rector himself, disturbed by the noise, confronted the terrified children. They clung to each other, insisting that they had seen a ghost. Though the rector tried to comfort them with rational explanations, something inside him stirred. Later, when he entered the drawing room, he felt a coldness he could not explain, and as he left, the heavy door slammed shut behind him with unnatural force. This was not an isolated event. Over the decades, countless villagers reported seeing the same spectral nun wandering the gardens at twilight. She appeared silently, her dark robes trailing across the grass, her eyes fixed on something unseen in the distance. Farmers working nearby swore they saw her floating across the fields. Travelers claimed that their horses refused to approach the rectory gates at night, neighing in panic as if sensing an invisible threat. Some encounters were brief, lasting only seconds. A woman would see the nun's face in a window, only to watch it vanish when she looked again. Others described longer experiences, footsteps echoing in empty corridors, doors opening by themselves, the sensation of being watched. The fear among villagers became almost ritualistic. Children were warned not to play near the rectory after dark. Families crossed themselves when passing by. On stormy nights, locals would gather in taverns and share stories of what they had seen or heard, always in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might summon the spirit itself. These testimonies blurred the line between folklore and reality. To outsiders, they were merely ghost stories. But to the people of Borley, They were lived experiences, encounters that left chills on their skin and fear in their bones. By the turn of the century, Borley Rectory was no longer just a parish home. It had become a place of dread, a beacon of the supernatural. And the stories told by villagers were only the beginning of a haunting that would soon grow even more terrifying. When the Smith family moved into Borley Rectory in the late 19th century, they expected a quiet life in service of the parish. The building was large but functional, a place to carry out the duties of faith. Yet almost as soon as they settled in, the couple began to feel that something was deeply wrong within its walls. The story that marked the beginning of their ordeal is one that still circulates today. While cleaning one of the seldom used rooms, Mrs. Smith opened a wardrobe tucked away in a dark corner. At first, it seemed empty, until she reached to the back and her hand brushed against something cold and solid. To her horror, she discovered a human skull, yellowed with age, hidden among the dust and cobwebs. Authorities were contacted, but no one could explain how it had ended up there or who it belonged to. Estimates suggested it was over a century old, likely belonging to a young woman. Some whispered it was the remains of the nun, finally revealed after centuries of silence. After the skull was removed, the Smiths reported that disturbances increased dramatically. Footsteps echoed in the hallways at night, though no one was there. Lights flickered in windows when the family was downstairs. Mrs. Smith claimed to hear whispers whenever she walked alone in the corridors, words she could never quite understand. The air inside the house grew heavy, oppressive, as if unseen eyes were constantly watching. The Smiths endured the disturbances for only a short time before leaving Borley Rectory. But the building would not remain quiet for long. In 1929, the Foyster family moved in, and with them came some of the most terrifying reports in the rectory's history. Reverend Lionel Foyster and his wife Marianne quickly realized that their new home was unlike any other. For Marianne especially, the rectory became a nightmare. She described objects being hurled across rooms by invisible hands. Glass would shatter without reason, books would be flung from shelves, and doors slammed shut with enough force to rattle the entire house. More disturbing were the attacks on Marianne herself. She claimed unseen hands tugged violently at her clothing, pulled her hair, and even scratched her skin. On several occasions, she said she felt as though something was trying to drag her out of bed at night. The most chilling phenomenon, however, came in the form of writings that began to appear on the walls. Scrawled in strange handwriting, the messages seemed directed at Marianne. Some were pleas for help, others were sinister warnings. One reads simply, "Marianne, please help me." Another appeared in large, uneven letters, "Rest me." Visitors to the rectory witnessed these writings themselves. Some believed they were proof of a desperate spirit trapped within the house, perhaps the legendary nun reaching out from beyond the grave. Others suspected a cruel hoax, though no one could explain how the messages appeared right before their eyes. News of the Foysters' ordeal soon spread beyond Borley. Local newspapers, including the Daily Mirror, published stories of England's haunted house. Reporters who visited claimed to witness strange phenomena themselves, disembodied footsteps, sudden drops in temperature, and even dark figures moving through the courtyard. The attention only intensified the rectory's reputation, making it a place of both fascination and dread. For the Foysters, however, there was nothing glamorous about their experiences. Daily life became unbearable. Marianne confessed that she lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack or disturbance would come. Even simple tasks like walking through the hallway or entering the drawing room filled her with dread. The atmosphere was suffocating, a mix of sorrow and aggression that seemed to cling to every stone of the building. The family's young daughter was also affected. On more than one occasion, she was found locked inside rooms that had no locks on their doors. Toys moved by themselves. Her laughter would suddenly shift into terrified screams when she insisted that someone unseen was with her. By the time the Foysters left Borley Rectory in the mid-1930s, they were broken by the experience. Mary Ann later admitted to personal troubles, including a rumoured affair with a lodger, but even skeptics agreed that something strange had unfolded within the walls of that house. Whether the paranormal activity was genuine or tangled with human drama, the result was the same: Borley Rectory's legend grew darker, stronger, and more infamous than ever. What had begun as whispered folklore about a bricked-up nun had now become headline news. And for those who lived inside the rectory, it was not a story told in taverns or passed down by elders, it was daily life, soaked in fear. By the time the Foyster family left Borley Rectory in the mid-1930s, the house had already earned its sinister reputation. But it was the arrival of one man, perhaps the most famous paranormal investigator of his era, that transformed the rectory from local legend into a subject of international fascination. His name was Harry Price. Price had built a career on chasing the unexplained. A member of the Society for Psychical Research, he was both celebrated and criticized for his bold investigations. When he first heard about Borley Rectory, he knew it was an opportunity he could not resist. The combination of folklore, eyewitness testimony, and newspaper coverage made the site irresistible. In 1929, Price visited the rectory with a team of reporters. Almost immediately, they claimed to witness strange activity. A stone was thrown across the courtyard by an unseen hand. A pane of glass shattered above them. Dark shadows moved through the rooms when no one was there. For Price, this was proof enough that Borley demanded serious study. Over the following years, he returned again and again, conducting séances inside the rectory's walls. Mediums reported contact with a female spirit who identified herself as the nun from the local legend. She told them she had been bricked alive centuries earlier, her soul trapped in eternal suffering. Through these séances, the spirit allegedly warned that the rectory would one day burn to the ground. Price also carried out excavations on the grounds. In one dig, his team unearthed human remains believed to be that of a young woman. Though skeptics questioned the authenticity, locals quickly tied the discovery to the legend of the nun. For many, it was chilling confirmation that the stories were true. In 1937, Price took his investigation to the next level. He leased Borley Rectory for an entire year, bringing in dozens of volunteers to record every incident. They documented knocks, footsteps, objects moving by themselves, and sudden cold spots that seemed to follow them through the house. Messages continued to appear on walls, pleading for help. To believers, it was undeniable evidence of the supernatural. To critics, it was elaborate trickery. Regardless, the attention made Borley Rectory world famous. Just 2 years later, the prophecy came true. In 1939, a fire broke out after an oil lamp was knocked over. The blaze consumed the rectory, leaving behind only ruins. Locals gathered to watch as the flames devoured the building, many whispering that the nun had finally had her revenge. Even after the fire, witnesses claimed to see a spectral figure wandering the rubble, her dark robes flickering through the smoke. The most haunted house in England was gone, but its story had only grown stronger. Decades later, the legend of Borley Rectory reached across the Atlantic. Among those who took an interest were two names that would become synonymous with the paranormal: Ed and Lorraine Warren. The American investigators, famous for their work on the Amityville haunting and the Annabelle doll, traveled to England and visited the grounds of Borley Church, which stood beside the ruins of the rectory. From the moment Lorraine stepped inside the church, she reported feeling the overwhelming presence of the nun. She described it as one of the most powerful and disturbing energies she had ever encountered. Ed, normally calm and pragmatic, admitted that the atmosphere chilled him to the bone. Both agreed that Borley was unlike any site they had ever investigated. The Warrens returned to the church multiple times over the years, each visit reinforcing their belief that the area was still plagued by the restless spirit of the nun. For Lorraine, the memory of Borley remained etched into her mind. Even late in life, She referred to it as one of the most terrifying places she had ever set foot in. Today, the rectory itself no longer stands. Yet the village of Borley continues to carry its reputation. Locals still whisper of lights flickering in the church windows at night, of footsteps echoing in the ruins, and of a spectral nun gliding silently across the churchyard. Paranormal investigators still make pilgrimages to the site, hoping to capture evidence of what so many before them claimed to experience. And beyond the village, Borley Rectory has cemented its place in modern culture. Its legends inspired countless books, documentaries, and most famously, the Conjuring universe of films. The terrifying character of Valak, the demonic nun, owes much of its origin to the chilling testimonies and folklore born in this small English village. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, Borley Rectory stands as a reminder of the power of storytelling, fear, and faith. It is a place where history and horror have intertwined, leaving behind an echo that refuses to fade. Perhaps the rectory's walls are gone, but the nun's shadow still lingers. And if you ever find yourself walking near Borley Church on a misty night, you may hear the whispers, feel the chill, and see her watching, waiting, never at peace. And so, the ruins of Borley Rectory remain silent. Yet the whispers never truly fade. For the villagers, the legend of the nun is not just a story from the past, it is a shadow that still lingers in the present. Perhaps you believe these tales are nothing more than folklore. Or perhaps, one day, you will find yourself walking near Borley Church on a misty night, and hear the sound of footsteps that do not belong to you. If you've enjoyed this journey into one of England's most haunted places, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and join our community for more terrifying true stories. Your support helps keep these tales alive, and ensures that we can continue to bring the shadows of history into the light. Until next time, pleasant dreams.